Hello and welcome. So in this game, the pawn structure definitely mattered, and it was basically the most important part of this game. So it is very instructive into how to not get a terrible structure and how to exploit it, and later also how to use it to your advantage to at least get something out of it. So let's take a look. So we have some kind of English. So this is basically a reversed Grand Prix attack, and here white plays a3, which is already a bad move. So firstly, if the opponent goes here, you can be quite guaranteed that after a3 he will take. There is no point in doing anything else, right? a3 is a generally useful move. So firstly, we have to understand that this structure is not good for white already, because with these doubled pawns, white has no expansion on the queen side. This b file is not that important because black can also always play b6 to guard this pawn. He can basically never play d4 because black will not, of course, take. He will never undouble our pawns. And he will be able to start targeting this pawn on c4. So this often comes down from the Nimzo-Indian defense, well, where black takes here. So this is quite similar to that. So white doesn't really have any good options here. If he could take with this d2 pawn, if it was on d2, then at least white would get the open d file. But here, white should probably not allow the doubling of the pawns, and after, for example, knight f6, white can finish development castle and start playing a3, b4, b5, playing on the queen side. And if he takes, take with the bishop to keep the structure intact, because now the problem is white does not have a plan. So this is the big issue. So also, white now started exchanging pieces, which is also a very bad decision, because the structure is most important in endgames, where the pawns might become weak. Until then, the structure doesn't matter that much, so white could still play on with castle and king side, and then try to do something. Maybe play c5 at some point. This would often be quite a useful move, though here it's not really possible because of queen e7. But we should use our pawn somehow. But bishop g5, now after h6, we're giving up the bishop pair, and now here white at least had the bishop pair for his bad structure. But now there is no more bishop pair. Now there's only bad structure that is left. So now e4. And this is the last mistake, after which the structure becomes horribly bad. And instead of this, white should probably at least put his pawns on the squares of not his bishop, right? So dark squares. So maybe e3. Try to play d4. Now maybe this pawn is not that weak. For example, d6. We could play bishop e2, castles, developing the pieces. Black would probably try to develop the bishop. It's not that clear what to do. White has some ideas like knight e2, knight b3, a4, a5, because this is also a weakness. So if we get rid of it, then it's great. And the position is just bad for white, because he has no flexibility. If he ever plays this, then black will simply not react. If white takes, he will get isolated doubled pawns. So after bishop e7, white's position is just very sad. We should avoid this. But if the pawn was back on the b file, this would be quite good, as white could try to expand on the queen side. After e4, now black can take, and now they have created doubled isolated pawns for us, and especially this pawn is extremely weak. As we saw in the game, it was very easy to attack. And because this pawn is over here and not here or here, white has no pawn breaks, right? If it was here, at least d4 would be a plan. If it was here, then something like c4, c5, expanding in the queen side would also be possible. But now nothing is possible. And now white has no plan on the king side either, so he has to just develop. Here, this was a good moment for white to understand his issues, and now he can tactically get rid of one of his isolated pawns. And this is a common thing. These two pawns are basically like one, so we should try to get rid of them as much as possible, and c5 is a very nice move, with the idea to exchange these pawns, and then we will be only left with one weakness instead of two. If black takes, now queen d5 is the point, getting the pawn back, activating some pieces, and something like this. Now we only have one isolated pawn. Still, the position is not great, but it's not terrible anymore. But white did not do this, and now there will be no more chances. Now black will just fix this pawn. b6 is a nice move to never allow c5. And from here, the position just goes downhill, as white simply has nothing to do. Black doesn't have to take the pawn right away, right? White kind of has enough defenders, but if he's going to defend the pawn with all his pieces, he can't do anything else. While Black also has the f-file, he can improve quite a bit. After a4, now we have another weakness as well, as now it's on a light square. As we saw in the game, it was quite easy to attack. It's hard to suggest anything, so maybe a4 is not that bad. Queen f7, and now we get some maneuvering. Notice how Black doesn't have to do anything. He walks around a bit. He understands that White cannot move any of these three pieces. So White just moves the rook around. The knights are exchanged. This doesn't help White. Anyway, here already this pawn is hanging, after which Black would also have a protected passed pawn. He doesn't see this and he plays on the king side. And here this pawn is attacked again and White goes back to defend it. But here, this is also quite an instructive point. White must use his pawn to at least get some kind of counterplay, because if he doesn't, then Black has this plan, and he has the plan of putting pressure here again. And here c5 is a nice move with the point. Now, if this pawn takes, now this pawn has become weakened. So now we are a pawn down, but after rook d1, we can go here and try to pick up this pawn, or maybe go here as well. And if we exchange the pawns, we will not be left with the c4 weakness. If this pawn takes, then we attack from the other side. Now this pawn on e5 cannot be defended. So this is quite rational, and now White can at least hope to get something for his bad pawn. And to exchange it for any other pawn would be a very big win. Queen d3, and now Black continues his attack, and White simply has nothing to do. Again, if the pawn was on the b file, we could at least plan for b4 or c5 at some point. Now nothing is possible. And Black slowly improves his position. There were, of course, some kind of chances. Here again, White could use his position to his advantage to take, and now again c5. Again, sacrificing the pawn to get some kind of targets. Now if this pawn takes, Queen a6, and we have a target here. If we pick up this pawn, we have a definite plan in the passed pawn here. Otherwise, we can play e5, and now we have a passed pawn on the e file. Granted, it's not a great passed pawn, but Black doesn't have a passed pawn of his own, so it is something. And the king is also quite open. So in this position, White is doing quite well, as this passed pawn compensates for the pawn deficit. But now everything gets exchanged, and in the endgame, especially in the bishop endgame, this structure becomes even more unpleasant, and here the position is more or less lost, especially after White takes. Here we should at least go here. If Black ever takes, then this would improve our structure. There was still, after c5, all of our pawns are fixed on light squares, so this is horrible, as the king will have a very easy march to the queen side. But after queen f6, now the king can arrive to take this pawn, and there's not that much we can do. One pawn is dropping, and all the other pawns are also weak. So from here, the position is hopeless, and nothing much happened anymore. So yes, the game was all about the structure, and there was not much else to look at here, right? So right when you got the structure, from here already, White doesn't have any ideas. The only idea is to try to get rid of this pawn, but this was not used, and then White had to suffer for the whole game and didn't really get much play. So generally, try not to double your pawns unless you're getting something in return. And here you got the bishop pair, so you should at least not give that up. But in this position, the bishop pair is not that useful, so we shouldn't even allow this. Just bishop d2, simplest solution, developing a piece, not allowing this. And White should be fine, and he can finish development, castle kingside, and try to play on the queen side.